She walked into that ballroom, and every powerful man in the country turned to look at her. Every man except one. He stood at the edge of the room in a navy dress uniform, not trying to impress anyone, not angling for an introduction, not even glancing in her direction. While senators leaned in close and billionaires straightened their ties, he quietly slipped a worn photograph from his breast pocket, looked at it for 3 full seconds, and smiled to himself like nothing else in that room mattered. Charlotte. Sorry Diane had been stared at her entire life. Being ignored was something she had never learned how to handle. Drop a comment with your city right now. I want to see how far this story has traveled. If it moved you, hit subscribe. Every single notification helps this channel grow. Now, let's get into part 1. The photograph was dog-eared at one corner and slightly faded from being folded and unfolded too many times. In it, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, gap-toothed smile hair in 2 lopsided pigtails, was holding up a sand dollar the size of her palm, like she'd just pulled the moon out of the ocean. Petty Officer First Class Cole Hargrove looked at that photo, the way some men look at the horizon from a ship's deck, like it was the only fixed point in a world that wouldn't stop moving. He slid it back into his breast pocket, buttoned the flap, straightened his uniform jacket. Then he looked up at the ballroom of the Meridian Grand Hotel, and every impulse in his body told him he did not belong here. The wedding was Senator Gerald Whitmore's youngest daughter, and if you wanted to understand just how far outside Cole's world this event was, consider this. The flowers in this room cost more than 3 months of his salary. He'd overheard a server say it. 3 months. Cole had done the math 3 times because he didn't believe it the first 2. He was here because of Commander Bressler, his CO, who had pulled him aside 2 weeks ago and said, Hargrove Whitmore's people specifically requested active duty representation at the ceremony. I'm giving you the honor. Don't embarrass the uniform. Honor. Right. Cole stood near the far wall, holding a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched, watching a room full of people who all seemed to know exactly which fork to use and exactly whose name to drop and exactly how to laugh at the right moment. Politicians. Executives. A man Cole was fairly certain he'd seen on the cover of Forbes. A woman in a red dress who kept appearing on a news ticker in his peripheral vision on one of the decorative screens the hotel had installed along the walls. He didn't know any of them. He didn't want to know any of them. He wanted to get through tonight, sleep in the hotel room the Navy had comped him, and call his daughter Lily in the morning. Except her name wasn't Lily anymore. He'd started calling her that as a nickname, but her given name was Rosie. Rosie May Hargrove, 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, obsessed with seashell strawberry ice cream and a stuffed elephant named Gerald that had 1 eye and smelled faintly of motor oil because she'd once dropped him in the garage and Cole had washed him 4 times, and somehow the smell remained. He thought about Rosie the way soldiers think about home, constantly, in the background of every other thought. She's at your mother's, Cole. She's fine. She's probably asleep already. Stop. He looked at his watch. 8:47 p.m. He had survived firefights in the Persian Gulf. He had stood watch in 30-foot swells off the coast of Japan. He had once gone 41 hours without sleep during a training exercise in the Mojave Desert. He was not going to survive this wedding reception. The shift in the room happened all at once, the way a weather system moves in. You don't see the moment it arrives. You just suddenly realize the temperature has changed. Every conversation paused. Every head turned, or at least drifted toward the main entrance. Cole didn't turn. He just watched the reactions the way he'd learned to read a room in the Navy, not by focusing on the object of attention, but on the people reacting to it. What he saw was remarkable. Men who had been mid-sentence forgot what they were saying. Women who'd been carefully not looking at other women's jewelry suddenly looked up. A young aide near the door physically straightened his spine, the reflex of someone who'd just spotted an authority figure they desperately wanted to impress. Cole finally tracked the movement. She was tall, not model tall, but tall enough that she commanded the room without heels she clearly didn't need. Dark hair. A navy blue gown that managed to be both understated and devastating at the same time. No entourage. No publicist whispering in her ear. She moved through the crowd the way a ship moves through harbor water with the quiet certainty of something that knows its own weight. He recognized the type immediately. Someone who had fought very, very hard to be in every room and had fought just as hard to make it look effortless. A waiter materialized near Cole's elbow, refilling a water glass. No one had asked him to refill mostly, so he could whisper to a colleague. "That's Diane Bennett, BCC Industries, youngest female CEO of a Fortune 100 company in U.S. history." The colleague made a sound of pure reverence. Cole looked back at his water glass. He had no idea what BCC Industries did, and he had no plans to find out. What happened over the next hour and a half could be described in military terms as a sustained tactical engagement, except Cole wasn't the one engaging. He was the one actively retreating. 3 separate men attempted to introduce themselves to him, pivoted halfway through the handshake when they realized he wasn't connected to anyone they needed to know, and drifted off toward Diane Bennett's orbit like satellites caught by gravity. One woman, early 50s, sharp eyes, the kind of smile that was actually a diagnostic tool, asked Cole directly, "Are you waiting for someone?" "No, ma'am." "Then you must be the only person in this room who doesn't have an agenda." "I have an agenda," Cole said. "I'm trying to figure out if the kitchen is doing a dessert course because I was told there'd be a dessert course and I haven't seen any evidence of that yet." She laughed, surprised genuinely. "I like you," she said. Then someone called her name from across the room and she was gone. Cole meant it, by the way, about the dessert. He watched Diane Bennett work the room the way you'd watch a master craftsman, not with admiration exactly, but with the professional respect of someone who recognized skill. She moved from group to group with an efficiency that looked like warmth. She asked questions more than she answered them. She never checked her phone. She never looked over someone's shoulder for the next better conversation. But Cole noticed, because Cole was trained to notice, that her eyes never fully relaxed. There was always a small, controlled tension at the corners. The way a person looks when they're performing comfort rather than feeling it. He'd seen that look before. He saw it in the mirror sometimes, after deployments. After those first months alone with Rosie, when he was so deep in grief and exhaustion, and what the hell am I doing, that he'd learned to wear a functional face over the real one. He didn't think about that long. He looked away. Not his business. At approximately 9:30, the string quartet transitioned into something more ambient. The dancing floor opened, and Cole decided he had fulfilled his obligation to the United States Navy and could justifiably slip away to somewhere quieter. He found a garden terrace off the east corridor. Not grand, just a stone patio with low lighting and a few iron benches and a view of the hotel's private grounds beyond. Quiet. The ambient noise of the reception was a dull murmur through the glass. Cole sat on one of the benches, loosened one button at his collar, the absolute minimum he'd allow himself, and pulled out his phone. No missed calls. Good. He opened his photos and scrolled. Rosie at the beach last September, that enormous sand dollar, the pigtails. Rosie asleep on the couch with Gerald, the one-eyed elephant, tucked under her chin. Rosie in her second-grade classroom photo, wearing the red sweater Cole had ironed for 45 minutes the night before because he'd read somewhere that first impressions matter even at age 7. He was staring at that last one, the classroom photo, when he heard the glass door open behind him. He didn't look up immediately. "The dessert course started," a woman's voice said. "Chocolate lava cake. You were right to hold out." Cole looked up. Diane Bennett was standing in the doorway, holding 2 small plates, looking at him with an expression that was equal parts amusement and something harder to name. He stood automatically, old habit, the kind the Navy drills into you and never quite comes back out. "Ma'am, please don't call me that." She walked over and held out one of the plates. "I watched you slip out here, and I thought anyone who leaves a room full of people fighting for my attention to come eat dessert alone must be doing something more interesting than what I'm doing." Cole took the plate because refusing it would have been strange. "I wasn't doing anything interesting. You were looking at something on your phone and smiling like you'd just heard the best news of your life." He looked down at the phone in his other hand. Rosie's classroom photo was still on the screen. "My daughter," he said. "It wasn't a decision. It just came out." Diane sat down on the bench, not asking permission, not waiting to be invited, and looked at the screen he was holding. "She's beautiful," she said. "Just that. No how old is she or what's her name or any of the standard issue responses. Just the one true thing." "Yeah," Cole said. "She is." He sat back down. There was a foot and a half of iron bench between them. The chocolate lava cake was warm. Outside, somewhere in the hotel grounds, something a fountain maybe made a sound like quiet water over stone. "I'm Cole," he said. "I know. The aide near the door told me. Navy single father escorted the senator's table in." She paused. "I'm Diane." "I know," he said. "The waiter near the wall told me. BCC Industries Fortune 100 youngest female CEO in history." Something flickered across her face. Hard to read. "Is that all he said?" "He also said the word youngest, like it was a prayer." She let out a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something else, a small exhale of something that had been held in too long. "They always say that, youngest. Like it's the most interesting thing about me." Cole looked at her, really looked at her for the first time that evening. "Is it?" "No." She looked out at the dark grounds. "Not even close." "Then what is?" She was quiet for a moment. The party murmured behind the glass. Somewhere in the hotel a car arrived, the crunch of gravel, adore voices. "I built something from nothing," she said finally. "And somewhere in the middle of building it, I forgot to build anything else." Cole looked at his daughter's photo. He thought about 18-hour shifts. He thought about deployment leave, and the way Rosie sometimes still reached for a woman who wasn't there. He thought about midnight homework sessions, and the time he'd burned the birthday cake so badly, the smoke alarm went off twice, and Rosie had laughed so hard she fell off her chair, and somehow that was one of the happiest moments of his adult life. "I know what that's like," he said, "forgetting to build anything else." She turned to look at him, and something in her expression, just for a second, stopped being a performance. "Do you?" she said. "Different version of the same thing. Tell me." Cole wasn't a man who talked easily. He'd been told that, firmly, by multiple people over the years. But there was something about this terrace and this darkness and the fact that Diane Bennett was looking at him the way no one had looked at him in a very long time, like she actually wanted to hear what he was going to say, not what she expected him to say, that made him speak. He talked about the Navy, about deployments that stretched 6 months into 8. About standing on the deck of a ship in the middle of the Pacific and calling his daughter on a satellite phone with a 12-second delay, the two of them talking over each other, laughing about it, neither of them able to say the real things because the connection was too unstable and the clock was running. He talked about Marcus No, about his ex-wife Elena, not her name, just her, the way she'd left. Not dramatically, not in a fight. Just gradually and then completely. Rosie was 4. Cole was on a 3-month assignment off the coast of South Korea. By the time he got home, there was a note on the kitchen counter and a suitcase missing from the closet, and a 4-year-old who kept asking, "When is Mama coming back?" in a voice so matter-of-fact, it absolutely destroyed him. He talked about learning to do Rosie's hair, about the YouTube tutorials he watched at 11 p.m., about the time he used a curling iron for the first time, and Rosie told him it was interesting, very diplomatically for a 6-year-old. And he'd actually gone back and watched 4 more tutorials before he got it right. Diane listened through all of it. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to relate or redirect. She just listened the way people listen when they are genuinely hungry for something real. When he finally stopped, she said, "How does she do Rosie with all of it?" "She's tougher than I am," Cole said. "By a factor of about 10. "Where is she now?" "My mother's place. She's probably got Gerald in a headlock." He paused. "Gerald is an elephant." "Naturally. One eye, smells like motor oil, irreplaceable." "Every family needs a Gerald," she said. Family. The word sat there between them warm and slightly complicated. "What about you?" Cole asked. Not because he was trying to match share for share. Because he actually wanted to know. Diane looked at her hands. She was still holding her dessert plate, the cake barely touched. "I have a company," she said. 8,000 employees, 14 offices across 9 countries. Revenue last year that I won't say out loud because it sounds obscene. She paused. "And I go home to an apartment that I chose for its view of the city, and the view is beautiful, and I have never once sat and looked at it just for the pleasure of it. Because when I sit still, I start thinking about what I should be doing instead of sitting still." Cole nodded slowly. That I also know. But you... She stopped herself. What? You have Rosie, she said. Whatever else is missing or broken or complicated, you have something that pulls you back. Something that matters more than the thing you built. Cole thought about that classroom photo. Red sweater. Gap-toothed smile. Yeah, he said. I do. The glass door behind them opened. An aide, the spine-straightening one, appeared. Ms. Bennett, Senator Whitmore is asking for you. The toast. I'll be right there. The aide disappeared. Diane stood, smoothed her gown. And for just a second, Cole watched her put the armor back on, not cruelly, just automatically, the way you pull on a coat against cold air. She picked up the empty plate from the bench. Then she stopped. Didn't turn around. Just said quietly, almost to herself, "Nobody in there has said one true thing to me all night." Cole said nothing. She turned then halfway and looked at him. "Why wouldn't you look at me?" she asked. "When I walked in, everyone else—" "I noticed you," Cole said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She waited. Cole thought about it. About the honest answer. About how to say it without it sounding like a line, which it wasn't. It was just the truth. The plain, unglamorous truth. "Everyone else in that room looked at you like you were something to acquire," he said. "I didn't want to do that." Diane Bennett looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and walked back through the glass door into the light and the noise and the performance. Cole sat alone on the terrace for another 20 minutes. He wasn't thinking about the wedding. He wasn't thinking about the Navy, or the flight home, or the report he had to file by Thursday. He was thinking about the way she'd said, "Nobody in there has said one true thing to me all night." The exact tone of it, flat and honest and quietly devastated. He was thinking about how that was the kind of loneliness that no amount of money could solve, because it didn't come from what you lacked. It came from what you'd traded away without quite realizing you were doing it. He pulled out his phone again. Rosie's classroom photo. Red sweater. Gap-toothed smile. Gerald, the one-eyed elephant. He held the photo for a moment, then put the phone away and went back inside. He did not look for Diane Bennett, but he already knew that question she'd asked him. "Why wouldn't you look at me?" wasn't finished. He just didn't know yet how far it would follow him home. Cole flew home on a Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday, he had convinced himself the whole thing meant nothing. That was the plan anyway. The plan lasted approximately 4 days. He was in the middle of a pre-deployment equipment check, crouched on the deck, running through a checklist he'd run through 200 times, checking seals on a pressure housing unit, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number, Virginia area code. He almost didn't answer. "Hargrove," he said out of reflex. A brief pause. Then, "You answer your personal phone like it's a military line." He knew the voice immediately, didn't know why that bothered him. "Ms. Bennett? You said you wouldn't call me that. You said I shouldn't call you that. I don't think I made any promises." Another pause, and this time there was something in it. A small warmth, reluctant like a window cracked open just enough to let in air. "Fair point. Do you have a minute?" Cole looked at the pressure housing unit, at the checklist, at Petty Officer Daniels across the deck, who was watching him with undisguised curiosity. Cole turned away and lowered his voice. "1 minute. "I wanted to apologize," Diane said, "for disappearing the way I did the other night. The aide, the toast, it was rude. You were being honest with me, and I just... You had somewhere to be. It's fine." "It's not, actually." She said it simply, without drama. "I've been thinking about what you said. About noticing me, without looking at me like something to acquire." A beat. "I don't get that very often. I wanted you to know it stuck with me." Cole said nothing for a moment. On the deck, Daniels had given up pretending to work and was openly watching him now. Cole turned another 45 degrees away. "How'd you get this number?" he asked. "Senator Whitmore's office." She paused. "I may have implied it was for a veterans initiative." "Did you? I'm not proud of it. Doesn't sound like something the youngest female CEO of a Fortune 100 company does." "No," she said. "It doesn't." And there it was again, that quiet warmth. Like she was surprised at herself. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to have coffee, sometime. No agenda. Just—" She stopped, and Cole realized with some interest that Diane Bennett was not accustomed to finishing sentences that began with just. "Just what?" he asked. "Just coffee," she said. "With someone who tells the truth." He told himself the whole drive to D.C. that it was just coffee. He told himself the same thing while he changed his shirt twice and settled on the one Rosie had once declared, "The blue one that makes you look like a real person, Daddy, not a Navy person." He told himself that for the 40 minutes he sat across from Diane Bennett at a small corner table in a coffee shop that was deliberately not fancy her choice, which surprised him, and then stopped telling himself anything because there wasn't room for it. She was different outside the ballroom. Still precise, still controlled. But the armor sat differently on her, not gone, just loosened slightly at the joints like she'd decided this particular hour didn't require full fortification. She asked about Rosie first thing. Not as small talk, not to warm up the conversation. She asked with the specific focus of someone who had actually thought about it since the last time. "Did she have the sand dollar with her when you called her from the hotel?" Cole blinked. "I didn't call her from the hotel. You looked at her photo like you were about to." "She was asleep. I didn't want to wake her." Diane wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "That's you did the math, didn't you? Figured out the time zone whether she'd be asleep. It was 11 at night. She goes down at 8:30. You know her bedtime to the half hour. I know it to the minute," Cole said. 8:22 is the absolute outer limit before she gets a second wind, and then you've lost another hour and a half. You have to hit the window." Diane stared at him. 8:22. Give or take 3 minutes depending on whether there was a lot of sugar after dinner. She set her coffee cup down and looked at him the way you look at something that's slightly rearranging your understanding of the world. "Do you know what most of the executives I work with don't know about their children?" "I can guess." "Everything," she said. "They know their names and their ages and their pediatrician's last name. That's the set. They hire people to know the rest." "I don't have people," Cole said. "I know." She said it quietly. Not with pity, with something else. Something that might have been recognition. "I had people. My whole life. People to know the details. People to handle the things that required actual presence." She looked at her coffee. "I used to think that was efficiency." "What do you think now?" She didn't answer right away. Which Cole was beginning to understand was itself an answer. With Diane Bennett, the pause meant the truth was on its way, and she was deciding how much of it to let out. "I think efficiency is sometimes just a cleaner word for avoidance," she said finally. Cole nodded. He drank his coffee. Outside, a cab honked. Someone's phone rang and went to voicemail. The coffee shop existed in its ordinary Tuesday morning way, completely indifferent to the fact that two people at a corner table were having one of the more honest conversations either of them had managed in years. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said. "Yes." "Why'd you actually call me?" She looked at him. "I told you. I wanted to—" "You told me what you wanted me to think," Cole said. "Not unkind, just direct. That's not the same as why." The pause again, longer this time. "Because I went back into that ballroom," she said, "and I stood there for 2 more hours, and I talked to important people about important things, and I smiled and I performed and I did everything exactly right." She looked at her hands. "And the whole time I kept thinking about a man sitting alone on a terrace, eating chocolate cake, and looking at a photo of his daughter like she was the only real thing in the building." She met his eyes. "And for the life of me, I could not figure out why that was the most interesting thing that happened to me all night." Cole said nothing. "So I called," she said. "That's why." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee cup. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Okay, that's why." He took a sip. "I can work with honest." Coffee became a ritual, the way rituals always form, not by decision, but by repetition. The second time they met was 3 weeks after the first at the same corner table, and by the end of it, Cole had described Rosie's sand dollar collection in enough detail that Diane could identify a channeled whelk from a lightning whelk by its spiral direction. The third time, Diane brought a folder of something she'd been working on, a restructuring proposal for one of BCC's subsidiary divisions, and spent 20 minutes explaining it to Cole, not because she needed his advice, but because she said she needed to hear herself say it out loud, to someone who would tell her if it sounded wrong. "Does it?" she asked when she finished. Cole had been listening carefully the way he listened to operational briefings, tracking the structure of it, where the load-bearing arguments were, where the gaps were. "The third section," he said. "You're assuming the regional managers will absorb the restructuring without friction because the numbers make sense. Numbers don't make people feel safe. People make people feel safe." Diane stared at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She wrote something in the margin of her folder. "Keep going." "That's it. You need someone in those offices who those managers trust. Not a consultant. Someone internal. The math is right. The human part is missing." She wrote something else, then looked up. "You do know you'd be a terrifying executive." "I'm terrifying enough as a petty officer." "I believe that completely." It was, Cole realized afterward, the most comfortable he'd felt in a conversation with a woman since a long time. He drove home with the window down despite the cold because he needed the air. The fourth week he told her about Elena. Not the whole story. He wasn't sure there was a version of the whole story he'd ever told anyone, including himself. But the shape of it. The way a marriage can erode not in fights, but in silences. The way Elena had loved him and loved Rosie, and still somehow loved her own need for a life she hadn't chosen less. The note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't fair. I'm not strong enough to be what you need." She was honest, at least, Cole said. About not being strong enough. Does that help? Some days. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Other days, I think if you're not strong enough, you work on getting stronger. You don't just leave. He paused. But I don't know. I've got no right to rewrite someone else's limits. You have every right to be angry about it, Diane said. I'm not angry anymore. You're a little angry. He looked at her. She met his eyes steadily, not challenging, just accurate. The way she was accurate about most things. Maybe a little, he admitted. But mostly what I am is I'm okay. Rosie's okay. We built something that works. It's not what I planned, but it works. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then, I had a relationship end 3 years ago. His name was David. We'd been together 4 years. He told me when he left that he felt like he was dating a company rather than a person. Was he wrong? Another long pause. He wasn't entirely wrong. She turned her coffee cup. I told myself it was his limitation, that he couldn't handle an ambitious woman. I said that for a long time. And now I think I gave him very little to work with. I was so focused on proving I deserved my seat at the table that I forgot to be present anywhere else. She looked at the table. He wasn't wrong. He just couldn't wait for me to figure that out. Cole looked at her. There was something in her face when she said it. Not grief exactly, more like the quiet reckoning of someone who has finally, after years, decided to look directly at something instead of around it. You're being hard on yourself, he said. No, I'm being accurate. Those aren't always different things. She looked at him sharply. Then slowly the corner of her mouth moved. Did you just turn my own line back on me? I thought it was a good line. It is, she said. That's annoying. He smiled. She almost smiled back, the real one, the one that moved all the way up to her eyes and changed her whole face and then caught herself and looked away, and Cole thought, there she is, the woman behind all of it. It was Rosie who made it real. Not intentionally. Rosie didn't do anything intentionally except collect seashells and negotiate bedtime extensions with the strategic precision of a tiny defense attorney. What she did was call Cole's phone at exactly the wrong, or maybe exactly the right moment, 3 seconds after Cole and Diane had ordered their 5th round of coffees at their 5th consecutive Tuesday meeting, and Cole looked at the screen and said, I have to take this, and answered it before he'd thought about the fact that Diane was sitting 2 feet away. Daddy? Rosie's voice was the particular mix of urgent and delighted that meant something had happened that required immediate adult acknowledgement. Daddy Grandma's cat knocked Gerald off the shelf, and Gerald fell into the laundry basket, and now Gerald smells like lavender. Cole pressed his fist against his mouth for 1 second. Is Gerald okay otherwise? He looks sad. Gerald can't look sad. He only has one eye. He can still look sad with one eye, Daddy. That's actually sadder. Cole looked at Diane across the table. Diane was very carefully not laughing, which he could tell was costing her significant effort. Okay, buddy, he said. Gerald will recover. Lavender is not a hostile environment. What's hostile mean? Dangerous. Oh. A pause. Daddy, who are you with? You sound different when you're with someone. Cole felt the back of his neck get warm. I'm having coffee with a friend. A lady friend or a man friend. A person friend. That's not an answer. Rosie had been reliably identifying evasive answers since approximately age 5. Is she nice? Cole looked at Diane, who had now given up entirely on not smiling and was watching him with an expression of pure helpless delight. Yeah, he said. She's nice. Does she like seashells? I'll ask. He lowered the phone. Do you like seashells? Diane blinked. Yes, very much. Cole raised the phone. She says yes. What's her name? Her name is Diane. Hi, Diane, Rosie shouted loud enough that Cole was fairly certain Diane heard it without assistance. Diane's smile went all the way up, all the way, both sides. Hi, Rosie, she said toward the phone, knowing full well Rosie probably couldn't hear her. Tell her I have 43 shells, Rosie instructed, and a moon snail that I found at Assateague, and it's my best one. Cole relayed this information. Diane considered it seriously. Tell her a moon snail from Assateague is serious business. That's a real find. Cole relayed that too. There was a sound on Rosie's end that could only be described as pure vindication, a 7-year-old whose taste had been confirmed by an outside authority. See, Daddy? I told you it was serious business. You told me it was important. I believed you. You said, uh-huh, while making dinner. I was multitasking. Daddy. The word carried the weight of a full parenting critique compressed into 2 syllables. He laughed. Actually laughed the way he laughed with Rosie, loose and unguarded, and completely unself-conscious, and heard Diane across the table make a quiet sound, and when he glanced at her, something in her expression had gone very still. Not sad. Something closer to the opposite of sad, actually. Something that looked like a person recognizing an absence they hadn't had a name for until just now. He wrapped up the call. Told Rosie he loved her. Told her Gerald would be fine, and maybe lavender was an upgrade. Hung up. Put the phone on the table. She sounds extraordinary, Diane said, quietly. She is. Cole looked at the phone for a moment. Sorry about that. Don't apologize. Diane picked up her coffee, set it down again without drinking. Can I ask you something that might land wrong? Yeah. Does she miss having a woman around Rosie? Cole thought about this honestly, which was the only way he knew how to think. She doesn't talk about it the way you'd expect. She doesn't spend a lot of time on what's missing. She's more interested in what's there. He paused. But sometimes, she'll see something another kid with both parents or a mom picking someone up at school, and she'll get very quiet for a few seconds. And then she moves on. She always moves on. She learned that from you, Diane said. Cole looked at her. Moving on, Diane said. She learned it from watching you do it. He didn't have an answer for that, not a quick one. Diane looked at her coffee again. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. I think I'd like to meet her, sometime, if that ever made sense. I'm not trying to... She stopped. Tried again. I just think she sounds like someone worth knowing. Cole sat with that for a moment. The coffee shop did its ordinary Tuesday thing around them. Yeah, he said finally. She is. He didn't say yes, you can meet her. He didn't say not yet. He said she is, and let that sit there between them warm and unresolved, and carrying more weight than either of them was quite ready to name. But when he drove home that evening, Rosie's voice on the phone and Diane's expression in the coffee shop kept overlapping in his mind, the two of them somehow occupying the same moment, the same frequency, and Cole Hargrove, who was not a man who believed in accidents, found himself thinking that 8:22 bedtime and moon snails from Assateague and a one-eyed elephant named Gerald might be the most important things that had happened to him in a very long time. He didn't know yet what to do with that, but he was starting to think he might want to find out. Cole thought about it for 2 weeks before he said anything to Rosie. Not because he was unsure about Diane. He was becoming slowly and somewhat against his own resistance quite sure about Diane. What he was unsure about was the geometry of it, how to introduce something new into the precise hard-won equilibrium he and Rosie had built together without tipping the whole structure sideways. Rosie's world was small by design, not from poverty or isolation but from intention. Cole had learned early that children who've lost something significant need their remaining world to feel solid, predictable. So he'd built her a life with clear edges. Tuesday was spaghetti night. Saturday morning was the farmer's market, where Rosie was personally acquainted with a woman named Dolores, who sold honey, and always saved her a small jar of the wildflower variety, because Rosie had once told her it tasted like sunshine. Sunday afternoon was the beach weather permitting, and Gerald, one-eyed lavender-scented Gerald, slept in the same spot on Rosie's pillow every single night without exception. Into this world, Cole was considering introducing a billionaire CEO. He told himself the word billionaire didn't matter, and it didn't, not to him. What mattered was that Diane Bennett was a woman Rosie didn't know, and the last woman Rosie had known in that specific capacity, in that this person is important to Daddy. Capacity had left a note on a kitchen counter, and a 4-year-old asking questions Cole couldn't answer. He sat with that for a long time. Then one evening, while Rosie was doing homework at the kitchen table, second-grade math, which she found slightly beneath her, and approached with barely concealed impatience, she said without looking up from her worksheet, "Is Diane coming to visit?" Cole, who was making dinner and had his back to her, stopped stirring. "What made you think about Diane?" "I didn't think about her. I've been thinking about her since the phone call." Rosie wrote something erased. It wrote it again. "You talk about her different than you talk about other people." "How do I talk about other people?" "Like they're on a list, like you're giving a report." She looked up. "You talk about Diane like she's a person." Cole turned around. His 7-year-old daughter was looking at him with her mother's eyes and his own particular brand of unblinking assessment, and he felt the familiar sensation of being seen through completely. "She is a person," he said. "Daddy." The full weight of the parenting critique again. "You know what I mean." He did know what she meant. He turned back to the stove. "Would you want to meet her?" A pause. He heard the pencil tap against the table twice Rosie's thinking rhythm. "Does she actually like seashells?" Rosie said. "Or did she say that to be nice?" "I think she actually likes them." "Okay." The pencil tapped again. "Does she know the difference between a moon snail and a shark eye?" "I don't think so, but I think she'd want to learn." Another pause. Longer. "Okay," Rosie said. "She can come." Cole exhaled, turned the burner down. "Just like that." "You already decided," Rosie said, and went back to her worksheet. "I'm just telling you it's okay." He called Diane that night, told her directly the way he did everything, no preamble, no softening. "Rosie wants to meet you. Saturday morning farmer's market, 9 o'clock. Dolores the honey lady will be there, so manage your expectations, because Dolores is the main attraction." A pause on the other end. When Diane spoke, her voice was different from her CEO voice, different from her coffee shop voice. Quieter, like she was making sure the words landed right. "Are you sure?" "Rosie's sure. I trust Rosie's judgment." "What if I—" She stopped. "What? What if she doesn't actually like me in person?" Cole thought about how to answer that. Then she'll be polite about it, but she'll stop making eye contact and start talking exclusively about shells, which means you've been classified as not essential company. He paused. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. How do you know? Because you're a person, he said. And Rosie can tell. He didn't sleep well Friday night. Not from dread exactly. More from the particular alertness of a man who is about to do something that can't be undone, not in a bad way, but in the way of a door, opening a thing set in motion. He lay on his back in the dark and listened to the quiet of the house and thought about thresholds. Some things, once they happen, reorganize everything that comes after them. He was fairly sure Saturday morning was one of those things. Diane was already there when they arrived. Cole had half expected her to be late, not from carelessness, but because the Diane he'd come to know ran on a schedule calibrated to boardrooms and international calls, not farmers markets. But she was standing near the entrance at 8:58, wearing jeans and a plain jacket. No jewelry, except small earrings. Hair down, looking slightly uncertain, in a way that Cole had never seen on her before, and that did something uncomplicated and warm to his chest. She spotted them. Her eyes went straight to Rosie. Rosie was holding Gerald she'd insisted on bringing him for reasons she declined to explain, and wearing her red rain boots despite the clear sky, because Rosie made footwear decisions based on personal conviction rather than meteorological data. They walked up. Cole said, "Rosie, this is Diane." Rosie looked at Diane with the frank, unfiltered assessment that only small children and military personnel can get away with. A full 4 seconds of direct eye contact. Then she said, "Your jacket has a pocket on the inside." Diane blinked, looked down. "It does? That's good," Rosie said with a gravity that suggested inner pocket quality was a firm criterion. "Gerald needs somewhere to go if it gets cold." Diane looked at Gerald, at his single remaining eye, at the slight lavender soap smell that still clung to him 3 weeks after the laundry basket incident. "He can absolutely use my pocket," she said without missing a beat. "I'll consider it an honor." Rosie studied her for another second. Then she held Gerald out. Cole watched Diane take the one-eyed motor oil and lavender elephant with both hands, tuck him carefully into her inside jacket pocket with just his head visible, and look back at Rosie for approval. Rosie nodded, turned, and walked into the market. "Come on," she said to both of them. "Dolores saves the wildflower honey, but only until 10. Cole and Diane fell into step behind her. He didn't look at Diane. He didn't have to. He could feel the shape of what was happening, and he didn't want to make it self-conscious by acknowledging it out loud. After about 30 seconds, Diane said very quietly, "She gave me Gerald." I noticed. "Is that what does that mean?" Cole considered. "In Rosie terms, it means you passed intake." Diane made a sound beside him, a small involuntary exhale of something that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite relief, and was maybe both at once. The morning went the way mornings go when a child is running them by Rosie's logic, Rosie's pace, Rosie's priorities. They spent 20 minutes with Dolores, during which Rosie explained to Diane the precise, qualitative difference between wildflower honey and clover honey, in enough sensory detail that Dolores told her she had a future in food writing. They examined 3 different vegetable stalls, not to buy anything, but because Rosie liked looking. They stopped at a booth selling handmade jewelry, where Rosie studied a set of earrings shaped like tiny shells for a long moment before concluding they were pretty good but scientifically inaccurate because the spiral was wrong for the species depicted. Diane crouched down beside her at the jewelry booth. "Which species do you think it's supposed to be?" "Probably a periwinkle, but the artist made the opening too wide." Rosie picked up one of the earrings very carefully. "See, a real periwinkle opening is tighter, more closed in." "How do you know that?" "I have 44 now," Rosie said. "I got a periwinkle last weekend at Chincoteague. Daddy drove 2 hours. Diane looked up at Cole over Rosie's head. Cole shrugged one shoulder. "What can I tell you?" Diane looked back at Rosie. "Can I see your collection sometime?" Rosie set the earring down. Thought about this with her full attention, the way she thought about important decisions. "You'd have to come to our house." "I know. And you'd have to be careful. Some of them are fragile." "I'm very careful with things that matter," Diane said. Rosie looked at her. One of those long, unblinking assessments. Then, Okay, but you have to label which ones you pick up so you put them back in the right place. I have a system. Tell me the system, Diane said, and Rosie told her. All of it. The geographic organization, the size gradients within each section. The special display case for the moon snail from Assateague. Diane listened the way she'd listened to Cole in the coffee shop, fully without performing attention, just actually paying it. Asking specific questions, remembering the answers. Cole stood back and watched his daughter explain her taxonomy of the sea to a woman who ran a 14-country corporation and felt something happen in his chest that he couldn't have named precisely, but that he recognized as the feeling of two separate parts of his life becoming one thing. It was terrifying. He decided to let it be terrifying. After the market, they walked to a park bench near the water and shared a container of strawberries Rosie had insisted on buying from a stand near the exit. Rosie ate hers with solemn dedication. Gerald had been reinstated in Diane's pocket and appeared to be supervising. "Do you have kids?" Rosie asked Diane, directly between strawberries. "No," Diane said. "I don't." "Do you want them?" "Rosie," Cole said. "It's a real question," Rosie said with dignity. "It's okay," Diane said. To Rosie, "I used to think I didn't have time. Now I think I was wrong about what time is for." Rosie chewed a strawberry, processed this. "Time is for people," she said, as if confirming something she'd already decided. "Yes," Diane said. "That's it exactly." Rosie looked at her, then at Cole, then back at Diane. Then she held out a strawberry, the largest one in the container. It was Cole knew a significant gesture. Rosie applied rigorous quality ranking to strawberries and always saved the best one for last. Diane took it, ate it, looked at Rosie. "That was the best strawberry I've ever had." "I know," Rosie said. "I have a good eye." Diane laughed full and unguarded, the sound of a woman who had forgotten for a moment to be careful. Cole looked at the water and smiled and said nothing. Over the next 3 weeks, Diane came back. Not every day. Not even every week. At first she was careful about that, and Cole respected the carefulness. She came when it made sense. When Rosie asked once offhandedly if Diane knew that moon snails actually ate other snails by drilling through their shells. Cole mentioned it to Diane on the phone that evening, and Diane said, "I need to verify that because that is extraordinary," and researched it and showed up the following Saturday with a marine biology book from a DC bookstore that had a full chapter on gastropod predation, which Rosie read cover to cover in approximately 40 minutes and declared mostly correct. She came for Sunday afternoon beach walks. She wore old sneakers that the sand got into without complaint, and helped Rosie dig for coquina clams at the waterline, and got completely absorbed in a discussion with Rosie about whether the size of a shell correlated to the size of the creature that made it a question. They ended up looking up together on Rosie's tablet, while Cole cooked dinner and listened to them argue the finer points from the kitchen. She sat at the kitchen table one Tuesday and helped Rosie with a science project about ocean ecosystems, not doing it for her, which Rosie would have rejected immediately, but asking questions that made Rosie think harder, which was exactly the right approach, and which Cole noted with quiet admiration. She came to Rosie's school play third row slightly to the left because Cole had determined through 2 years of experience that third row slightly left was the optimal viewing position, and watched Rosie play a very authoritative narrator with 8 lines of dialogue, and afterward told Rosie she delivered the word ecosystem with more conviction than most professional speakers Diane had seen, which was true, and which Rosie received with the composure of someone who already knew. And slowly, in the way of things that matter, Rosie stopped treating Diane like a guest. She started treating her like a fixture, like a person who was supposed to be there. It was the small things that marked the change. Rosie stopped explaining the shell system every time Diane came over because Diane already knew it. She started asking Diane's opinion on things, not big things, but Rosie things, like whether the moon snail should be moved to a higher shelf where it would get more light, or whether 44 was enough shells, or whether she should aim for 50 before her birthday. She stopped putting Gerald away when Diane arrived, which had been a subtle protective behavior Cole had clocked from the beginning. One Saturday, Rosie fell asleep on the couch between them. They'd been watching a nature documentary about tide pools, which was Rosie's choice, and Rosie had made it approximately 40 minutes before going under. And Cole reached over to pick her up and carry her to bed. And Diane quietly took Gerald from the couch cushion and tucked him under Rosie's arm before Cole lifted her. He looked at Diane over Rosie's head. Diane looked at her own hands like she wasn't sure what they'd just done. "Sorry," she said quietly. Was that too much?" "No," Cole said. "Just that." He carried Rosie to bed, came back out. Diane was standing in the middle of his living room, with her arms wrapped loosely around herself, not looking at anything in particular. "You okay?" he asked. She turned, and on her face was an expression he hadn't seen before. Not the careful warmth of the coffee shop, not the delight of Rosie's taxonomy lessons, not the guarded performance of the ballroom. Something rawer. Something that looked like a woman standing at the edge of something large looking down, not sure whether what she was feeling was fear or relief. "I didn't know it felt like this," she said. "What? This?" She gestured slightly at the room, the house, the space they were standing in. "I didn't know it felt like something real." Cole looked at her. He was good at reading what people couldn't say directly. It was a skill built from years of watching for what wasn't in the briefing. And what he read in Diane Bennett, standing in his living room at 9:30 on a Saturday night, with the remains of a tide pool documentary on the TV, and the smell of the dinner he'd cooked still in the air, was something he understood completely. She'd been building things her whole life. This was the first thing she'd ever stepped into instead of building from outside. "Yeah," he said. "It does." He crossed the room, sat back on the couch. After a moment, she sat beside him. Not close enough to be a decision, close enough to be a fact. Outside, something moved a car, a wind, the ordinary night doing its ordinary things. Inside, the TV still showed the tide pools, the small creatures going about their small essential lives in the shelter of the rocks. Cole looked at the tide pool footage and thought about thresholds the way he had on Friday night 2 months ago, lying in the dark. About things that reorganize everything after them. He'd been right about Saturday morning. He was starting to think he'd underestimated what came after. What neither of them knew yet, what they were both about to find out in the hardest possible way, was that the world outside that living room had been paying attention. And it had opinions. The photo that started everything was taken on a Sunday. Cole didn't see the photographer. He wasn't looking for one. Why would he be? They were at the beach, the three of them doing what they did on Sunday afternoons. Rosie was at the waterline digging for coquina clams. Diane had her sneakers off and her jeans rolled to the knee, standing beside Rosie, pointing at something in the wet sand. Cole was 10 feet back watching them, and he was smiling, not a posed smile, not a conscious one, just the smile of a man watching something good happen in front of him. Someone with a telephoto lens caught that moment. Cole's smile. Diane's hand pointing at the sand. Rosie looking up at her. By Monday morning, it was on 6 different websites. The headline that did the most damage read, "BCCCEO, Diane Bennett's Secret Life Navy Man and His Daughter Gold Digger Plot or Corporate Distraction." Cole found out about it the way he found out about most things he didn't want to know, from someone else's face, before anyone said a word. Petty Officer Daniels walked into the equipment bay Monday morning and looked at Cole with the specific expression of a man carrying information he wished he didn't have. "What?" Cole said. Daniels handed him his phone. Cole read the headline, read the article under it, 3 paragraphs of insinuation dressed as reporting 2 anonymous sources, described only as people close to BCC leadership, a cropped version of the beach photo that somehow made him look like he was watching Diane instead of watching his daughter. He handed the phone back. "You okay?" Daniels said. "Call me when it's time for morning muster," Cole said, and walked outside. He stood in the cold air for about 90 seconds and did the same breathing exercise he used during high-pressure operational situations: 4 counts in hold, 4 counts out. It didn't fix anything. It just kept the noise manageable. Then he called Diane. She answered on the first ring. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Cole. My communications team called me at 6 this morning. I've had my lawyer on the phone. I'm trying to—" "Don't apologize," he said. Did you know someone was following you? No, absolutely not. I would never. I know you wouldn't. He said it without hesitation because it was simply true. I'm not asking to assign blame. I'm asking what the current situation is. She exhaled. He could hear her pulling into something more functional, the executive switching on, which was not a bad thing in a crisis. 3 major outlets have picked it up. My board chair Wallace Greer called me at 6:30. He wants an emergency call this afternoon. My PR team wants me to release a statement clarifying the nature of our clarifying what we are. What did you tell him? I told him I'd call him back. A pause. What do we tell them? Cole leaned against the exterior wall. The cold came through his jacket, but he didn't move. What do we want to tell them? Silence for a moment. It was a different question than what she'd asked. I don't want to tell them anything, she said finally. I don't think it's their business. It's not, Cole said. But that's not a position that protects Rosie. The pause this time was longer. He heard her breathe. Rosie, she said, quietly, like she'd just remembered to factor in the most important variable. What are they saying about her? Cole asked. He hadn't read past the headline in the first paragraph. He needed to know, but he'd needed a minute first. One outlet ran her name, just her first name, and the detail about the beach. Diane's voice went tighter on that. My lawyers have already sent a cease and desist on the minor child identification. Cole, I am so angry about that. She didn't ask for any of this. Cole closed his eyes for 3 seconds. 7 years old, digging for coquina clams. Being called a detail in someone's narrative about her father. Okay, he said. His voice was level. Here's what we don't do. We don't panic. We don't release a statement that reads like an apology. And we don't let them make Rosie part of this story. Agreed. All of that agreed. He heard her pause. What do we do? You handle your board. I'll talk to my CO before he reads about it somewhere. And we don't change anything. He paused. Unless you need to. What does that mean? It means if this is going to cost you something real, your company, your position, I need you to tell me that. Not to protect myself. Because you've worked your whole life for what you built, and I'm not going to... Cole. Her voice was firm. Not warm, firm, something harder. Stop. I'm being practical. You're being noble, which is not the same thing, and right now it's not helpful. A beat. I'm not walking away from this because a board chair had a bad Monday morning. Are we clear? He was quiet for a moment. Clear. Good. She exhaled. I'll call you after the board call. The board call lasted 2 hours and 18 minutes. Cole knew this because Diane texted him when it started going in. Wish me luck. And again when it ended. Done. Calling you in 10. And he'd watched the clock both times from the parking lot of the commissary where he'd gone during his lunch break to avoid the equipment bay where Daniels and 2 other guys were absolutely not talking about it in a way that was loudly obvious. When she called, her voice was controlled in the way it got when she'd been performing control for an extended period, and was starting to show the seams. Wallace wants a statement, she said. Something that repositions my personal life as consistent with BCC's values around family and community. His words. What does that actually mean? It means he wants me to turn our relationship into a PR strategy. Her voice stayed flat. He also suggested, and I want to be precise here, that if the relationship were to resolve itself quietly in the near term, the board would view that as an act of good faith toward shareholder interests. Cole said nothing. Cole. I heard you. Say something. I'm deciding whether what I want to say is useful. Just say it. He asked you to break up with me to protect the stock price, essentially. And you're telling me this because you deserve to know what's happening. Her voice shifted the control, giving slightly the seams opening. And because I want you to know that I told him the meeting was over. Cole breathed. Diane, he doesn't get to make that call. Wallace Greer does not get to sit in a conference room and decide what my private life looks like. I have given that company 12 years. 12 years of 100-hour weeks and canceled vacations, and one relationship that died specifically because I put that company first. Her voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud, very quiet, and very precise, the way something is when it's been compressed under pressure for a long time. I am not doing that again. Cole leaned against the car, looked at the sky. The stock's going to take a hit. Probably. They'll put more pressure on you. Definitely. Are you prepared for what that looks like? No, she said. But I'm done preparing for things that don't matter and ignoring things that do. A pause. Is that crazy? No, he said. But it's going to be hard. I know. Another pause. Softer now. How's Rosie? Cole had checked in with his mother at noon. Rosie was at school. The school had not been contacted by any media. He'd already called the principal, a competent woman named Mrs. Adeyemi, who had understood immediately and put 2 additional staff on pickup duty as a precaution. She's okay, he said. She doesn't know yet. Are you going to tell her? Tonight. Before she hears it somewhere else. He paused. I'll tell her it's noise. That some people make noise about things that aren't their business. Is that enough? For now, Rosie's tougher than any headline. He paused. But I need to be home for it. Go, Diane said immediately. Be home. We'll talk later. Diane. What? You were right about Wallace Greer, Cole said. And I want you to know whatever you're walking into with that board, you're not walking into it alone. A long silence. Long enough that he was about to ask if she was still there. Nobody said that to me in a very long time, she said, quietly, like she was telling a small truth to the air, not just to him. Get used to it, Cole said. He told Rosie at dinner. He didn't frame it as a crisis. He sat across from her, waited until she'd eaten most of her spaghetti. It was Tuesday. It was always spaghetti on Tuesday. And said calmly and directly, some people took a picture of us at the beach on Sunday, me and you and Diane, and they put it on the internet with a story that isn't very nice. Rosie looked at him. Not nice how? They said things about why Diane and I are friends that aren't true. Rosie considered this. What kind of things? The kind of things people say when they're trying to make something simple look complicated. He leaned forward slightly. I need you to know that if any kids at school say anything about Diane, about our family, about any of it, you can come straight to me. You don't have to handle it alone. Rosie put down her fork. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the table with the same expression she wore when she was working through a math problem, not distressed, just precise. Do you love Diane? She asked. Cole had not prepared for that to be the next sentence. He sat with it for a second the way you sit with something that turns out to be heavier than it looked. I think I'm getting there, he said honestly. Rosie picked her fork back up. Okay, she said. Okay, that's good, she said. Diane's good. She twirled spaghetti. Gerald likes her too. Cole felt the tightness in his chest release just slightly. Gerald's judgment has always been sound. His eye still works, Rosie said seriously. The good one. But Rosie came home from school on Thursday with the wrong kind of quiet. Cole knew the difference. There was Rosie's thinking quiet, and Rosie's tired quiet, and Rosie's I want to be alone quiet. This was none of those. This was the quiet of a child who'd absorbed something that hurt and hadn't yet decided whether to show it. He waited until after dinner. After homework, until they were sitting on the couch and Rosie was supposedly looking at her shell book, but hadn't turned a page in 11 minutes. What happened? He said. She kept looking at the book. A boy in my class said Diane only likes us because we're on the news. Cole kept his voice steady. What did you say? I said that wasn't true. She turned a page, didn't read it. He said his mom said Diane is famous for having lots of, I don't remember the word, for not being with people very long. Flings, Cole said quietly. I think that was it. Rosie turned another page. I told him his mom didn't know Diane. I told him Diane knows the difference between a moon snail and a shark eye, and she read a whole book about it because she wanted to understand my collection. She paused. He said that was dumb. What did you do? I walked away. She looked up at him. Her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them that was working hard at steady. Was that right? That was exactly right, Cole said. I wanted to say something meaner. I know. Walking away was still right. She looked at him. Daddy, is Diane going to leave? Cole put his arm around her. She leaned in immediately, the way she had since she was 4 years old, her head against his side. Not because of any of this, he said. No. How do you know? Because Diane isn't someone who leaves when things get hard. He thought about the board call, about I am not doing that again. She's someone who stays. Rosie was quiet for a moment. Like you? Yeah, he said. Like me. She leaned a little heavier against him. He held on. Outside, the news was doing what news does. Amplifying, distorting, filling airtime with the shapes of other people's lives. Inside, the shell book sat open to a page about moon snails, and Gerald watched from his spot on the couch arm with his single operational eye, and Cole held his daughter and thought about what it means to stay. 3 days after that, Diane walked into a board meeting she hadn't been scheduled to attend. Her assistant had told her the quarterly review was running long, and there was no slot for her. Diane thanked her, said that was fine, and went in anyway. She sat at the end of the table in the chair that was technically reserved for visiting consultants and waited for the agenda item to conclude. Wallace Greer looked at her from the far end. Diane, we weren't expecting you. I know, she said. I want to address the board directly. 5 minutes. He looked at the other members. A few exchanged glances. Someone checked their watch. Finally, Wallace nodded. Diane put her hands flat on the table. No notes, no presentation. She'd decided in the car that whatever she was going to say needed to come from the place in her that didn't use slides. I've given this company 12 years, she said. I've made decisions that were good for shareholders when they were hard for me personally. I've sacrificed things I can't get back. I want to be clear that I don't say that to position myself as a martyr. I made those choices, and most of them were right. She looked at the table, then back up. What I'm not willing to do is make that particular trade again. Silence in the room. My personal life is not a liability, she said. What I do on a Sunday afternoon with people I care about is not a threat to this company's value. And if this board believes otherwise, then this board has a very narrow understanding of what a human being is for. She paused. I'm a good CEO. I have the numbers to prove it, and so do you. I'm also a person who has spent 12 years treating that fact as secondary. She looked at Wallace. I'm done doing that. If that creates a problem for this board, I want to know now. Not through an assistant's calendar block. Not through a suggestion from the board chair about what would be good for shareholder confidence. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Now. Nobody spoke. An older board member, Margaret Chu, who had been on the board since before Diane was CEO and who had always been the hardest to read, said very quietly, Nobody in this room is asking you to end a personal relationship, Diane. Diane looked at her. Wallace spoke out of turn. Margaret said with a precision that was also a verdict. That's being addressed separately. She looked around the table once. What this board wants is stability. What you're describing a person who knows what she is and what she isn't willing to trade that is stability. She looked back at Diane. Are we clear? Diane took a breath. Clear. Good. Margaret picked up her pen. Now, can we talk about the Singapore expansion because I have actual questions? Chatag. Diane sat in her car in the parking garage for 15 minutes after the meeting. She didn't call anyone. She didn't check her phone. She just sat with the particular quiet of a person who has just said a true thing in a room full of people and survived it. Then she called Cole. He picked up on the second ring. How'd it go? I think I still have a job, she said. Good start. Margaret Chu is either going to be my greatest ally or the most formidable obstacle I've ever faced. Which do you think? Ally, definitely ally. A pause. Cole, I said something in there. About what a human being is for. What did you say? She told him. The exact words as close as she could remember them. Cole was quiet for a moment when she finished. That's true, he said. I know. She looked at the concrete wall of the parking garage. I think that's the first time I've said it out loud. In a professional context. As if it were as legitimate as a quarterly report. It's more legitimate than a quarterly report. Don't tell my board that. Margaret Chu already knows, Cole said. Diane laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and a little tired and completely genuine. She pressed her hand over her eyes and laughed, and it came out with something else in it. Relief probably, or the release of pressure that had been building for weeks, or just the sound of a woman who had been holding herself very tightly for a very long time, finally letting something go. Come for dinner Sunday, Cole said, when the laughter had settled. Rosie wants to show you the coquina clams she pressed into clay last week. She made a whole relief map of the shell bed at Chincoteague. A relief map, Diane said. She's 7. She's 7 and she has a system. I'll be there, Diane said. What should I bring? Just yourself, Cole said. That's the only thing Rosie's asked for. Diane sat in the parking garage for another moment after they hung up. Then she started the car and pulled out into the gray afternoon, and for the first time in weeks and months, possibly in years. She was not thinking about the next meeting, or the next quarter, or the next problem to manage. She was thinking about a relief map of a shell bed, and a one-eyed elephant named Gerald, and Sunday. Sunday came the way Sundays do when you've been waiting for them quietly without ceremony, the morning light arriving through the kitchen window the same way it always did, indifferent to the fact that everything had shifted. Cole made pancakes. Rosie sat at the kitchen table with Gerald propped against the syrup bottle, both of them apparently supervising the process. Cole had learned somewhere around Rosie's 5th birthday that pancakes required an audience, and Gerald had been a fixture at the breakfast table ever since. The lavender smell had finally faded. Gerald smelled like Gerald again, which Rosie had announced with relief 3 weeks ago, and Cole had taken as a sign that some things recover. Diane arrived at 9:15 with a paper bag from the bakery, 2 blocks from her apartment in D.C., the good one, the one Rosie had declared acceptable after a rigorous croissant evaluation the month before. She knocked. Cole opened the door. She was in jeans and the jacket with the inside pocket, and she looked at him the way she'd started looking at him over the past weeks openly, without the armor. The way you look at someone whose face you've learned and aren't pretending otherwise. Croissants, she said, holding up the bag. Rosie's already been informed, Cole said. She's been managing Gerald's expectations. Diane came inside. Rosie looked up from the table, assessed the bag, assessed Diane, and said, "Did you get the plain ones or the almond ones?" "Both," Diane said. Rosie pointed at the chair beside her. "Sit here." Diane sat. Cole turned back to the pancakes. And for a few minutes, the kitchen was just the sounds of a Sunday morning, the hiss of the pan, Rosie explaining to Diane the precise structural differences between the 2 croissant varieties, Gerald participating silently but meaningfully from his post against the syrup bottle. It was, Cole thought, flipping a pancake, the most ordinary, extraordinary thing he had ever been part of. After breakfast, Rosie presented the relief map. She'd been working on it for 2 weeks. A clay tray about the size of a shoebox lid, pressed with the actual shells from her Chincoteague collection to create a topographic record of exactly where she'd found each one along the shell bed at the waterline. She'd labeled each impression in her careful second-grade handwriting with a small flag made from a toothpick and a piece of tape. Geographic coordinates, she'd told Cole seriously, were important. She'd looked up the latitude and longitude of Chincoteague Island and written them in the corner. Diane sat at the kitchen table and studied it with the focused attention she brought to restructuring proposals and quarterly projections, which was the only way to study it if you wanted Rosie's respect. "This one," Diane said, pointing to one of the larger impressions near the center. "Is this the moon snail?" "That's the moon snail," Rosie confirmed. "From September, 11:47. AM low tide -2 hours. Diane looked up at Cole. "She has a tide chart app," Cole said. "I calibrated it for Chincoteague specifically." Rosie added with the calm competence of a person who finds this completely normal. Diane looked back at the map. She traced the edge of one of the smaller impressions with her finger, not touching, just following the shape. Rosie, this is one of the most careful things I've ever seen. Rosie looked at the map, then at Diane. I wanted to remember where everything came from, she said. Not just what it is, where it started. Cole leaned in the kitchen doorway and said nothing. Diane looked at Rosie for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not dramatic, just deep. The quiet rearrangement of a person who has just heard a 7-year-old say something that cuts to the center of a thing she's been turning over for months. That's the smartest thing, Diane said softly, that I have heard in a very long time. Rosie considered this. Daddy says the same thing about people, she said. That where you came from matters, but it doesn't have to be where you stay. Cole looked at the ceiling for a second. I said that once, he told Diane. She files everything, Diane said. Gerald helps, Rosie said without looking up. They went to the beach that afternoon. Same stretch they always went to on Sundays, the one where the sand was coarser and fewer people came because the parking was inconvenient, which was exactly why Cole had found it in the first place. The water was cold. It was late in the year now, the season having turned while they weren't paying attention to seasons. But Rosie went to the waterline anyway, and stood with her sneakers exactly at the wet margin, which was the precise position she'd identified as optimal for finding shells without getting soaked. A calculation she'd refined over 2 years of field research. Cole and Diane sat on the dry sand a little ways back. For a while, neither of them spoke. Rosie moved along the waterline head down, occasionally crouching, occasionally holding something up to the light before either pocketing it or setting it back down with the same careful consideration she brought to everything. I've been thinking about something, Diane said. Cole waited. The board approved the Singapore expansion last week. Full budget, full timeline. She watched Rosie at the waterline. I should be focused on that. It's the biggest strategic move BCC has made in 6 years. It requires my full attention for at least the next 18 months. Okay, Cole said. I keep thinking about the shell map instead. Cole looked at her. She was still watching Rosie. I keep thinking about what Rosie said, about wanting to know where things came from, not just what they are. She paused. I built BCC from the outside in. I had a vision of what the company should look like, and I built toward it. I was so focused on the architecture that I never mapped where it started, why I started it, what I was actually trying to build. She picked up a small stone from the sand and turned it over in her fingers. I think I've been building the wrong thing for a long time, or the right thing for the wrong reason. What was the reason? She was quiet for a moment. To prove I deserve to take up space. She said it simply like a fact. My father built a company that failed when I was 12. Creditors came to the house. I watched him shrink. I decided I was 12 years old, and I decided that I was never going to shrink like that. I was going to build something so solid that no one could touch it. She set the stone down. And I did. I built something solid. Somewhere in there I stopped asking who it was for. Cole looked at the water. Who's it for now? She looked at him. I'm working on answering that. Rosie turned from the waterline and held something up. Moon snail, she called out. Baby one. From Chincoteague, Diane called back. No. This beach. First one from this beach. Rosie was moving toward them now, holding the shell carefully in both hands, the way she carried anything that mattered. Look, it's perfect. No chip anywhere. She crouched between them in the sand and held it out. It was small, barely the size of a quarter pail, and smooth, the spiral tight and complete. Diane took it carefully, turned it in her fingers, held it up to the light the way Rosie had showed her. It's beautiful, she said. It's yours, Rosie said. Diane looked at her. Rosie, I have 44, Rosie said. You don't have any. She said it with the logic of a person for whom this was simply the obvious conclusion. Besides, you need something from this beach. For your own map. Diane held the shell. She looked at it for a moment without speaking, and Cole could see the exact thing happening in her face. The careful, controlled Diane Bennett losing the fight to the other one, the one who sat on garden terraces and said, "Nobody in there has said one true thing to me all night." The one who tucked Gerald under Rosie's arm, and then looked at her own hands like she wasn't sure what they'd done. "Thank you," she said, quietly, like the words were carrying more than their face value. Rosie stood up and brushed sand off her knees. "I'm going back," she said, already turning toward the water. "There might be another one." The sun moved the way it does in late afternoon, fast. Suddenly, the light going golden, and then amber, and then long, the shadows stretching out across the sand. Rosie had found 2 more shells, neither a moon snail, but a good channeled whelk, and a coquina she was particularly pleased with, and was now sitting at the waterline arranging them on a flat rock in a configuration that apparently had meaning, though she hadn't explained what. Cole and Diane sat side by side, not with distance between them anymore. That had resolved itself over the weeks, without either of them narrating it, the way real things often do not by decision, but by the slow accumulation of proximity, until one day you notice the distance is gone. The water moved. The light moved. Rosie talked to her shells in a low voice Cole couldn't quite hear from here, which was one of his favorite sounds in the world. Diane was holding the baby moon snail in her closed hand, not looking at it, just holding it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." That first night, at the wedding. She turned to look at him. The amber light was on her face, and she wasn't performing anything, just looking. "Why wouldn't you look at me?" Cole had known at some level this question was coming. She'd asked it in the garden terrace with the tone of someone who hadn't finished asking. He'd known it would come back around. He just hadn't known when or whether he'd have a better answer by the time it did. He had a better answer now. He looked at her. "When you walked into that ballroom," he said, "every single person in the room turned to look at you like you were an asset, like you were something they could use or acquire or be seen near." He paused. "And I watched that happen, and I thought that woman is completely alone in this room." Diane was very still. "If I'd looked at you the way everyone else did, I'd have been one more person seeing the CEO, Cole said. "I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be one more person who looked at you and saw what you could do for them." He paused. "So I didn't look." "But you said you noticed me." "I noticed you," he said. "That's different. Noticing someone means you see them. Looking at them the way that room was looking at you, that's not seeing. That's just want." Diane held the shell in her closed hand. She looked at him for a long moment, the amber light holding everything still. "You were the first person in years," she said, "who made me feel like there was someone to see." "There is," he said. "There's a lot to see." She looked at him, and then, not dramatically, not with a sound, her face broke. Not into pieces, into something more like an opening. The way ice goes when the temperature changes, not shattering, but releasing, finding its liquid form. Her eyes filled, and she didn't look away, and Cole didn't look away, and neither of them said anything for a moment because there wasn't anything to say that wasn't already there in the space between them. "I'm not good at this," she said finally. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. "At being known. I've spent so long being legible in the ways that were useful and opaque about everything else. I don't always know how to—" She stopped. Tried again. "I'm learning." "I know," Cole said. "I'm watching you learn. It's one of the best things I've ever watched." She let out a breath, something in it that was almost a laugh. "That's a low bar." "No," he said. "It isn't." She looked at the water. He looked at her. Rosie was still at the waterline with her shells her back to them, the ocean doing its patient, uncomplicated work of arriving and retreating. "Cole," Diane said. "Yeah." "I don't want to go back to the apartment tonight." He looked at her. She was looking at the water, not at him, but he could read the shape of the ask underneath the words, not what it sounded like on the surface, but what it actually was. The ask of someone who had spent years going back to a beautiful apartment with a view of the city that she'd never once sat and simply looked at. The ask of someone who had just figured out sitting on a cold beach, holding a shell the size of a quarter, what she'd been building toward all along. "Then don't," he said. She turned to look at him, searched his face for something and apparently found it because the tension in her shoulders let go just slightly, but he noticed. "Gerald would need to be consulted," she said. "Gerald's already in your pocket," Cole said. "I think his position is clear." She laughed. The real one, both sides, all the way up. Rosie turned from the waterline. "What's funny?" she called. "Gerald," Cole called back. Rosie nodded satisfied as if this was a reasonable and expected punchline. "Gerald's always funny," she said, and went back to her shells. Later that evening, the dinner dishes put away Rosie in bed, with Gerald restored to his place on the pillow, the moon snail from that afternoon on Rosie's shelf, with a small flag that said, "This Beach Sunday." Cole and Diane sat on the back step of the house, not talking, just sitting with the night, which had the particular quality of nights that have earned their quiet. After a while, Diane leaned her shoulder against his. He put his arm around her. She held the baby moon snail in her open palm, not closed now, just resting there in the center of her hand. "Where it started," she said quietly, almost to herself. Rosie's words. What she'd said about the map. "Yeah," Cole said. "This is where it started," she said. "This beach. This Sunday." "Started a little before that," Cole said. She looked up at him. "Garden terrace," he said. "Chocolate lava cake. You told me you built something and forgot to build anything else." She looked at the shell in her hand. "You remember that?" "I remember most things that matter." She was quiet. The night was quiet. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once and was quiet too. "I didn't know," she said finally. "When I followed you out there, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that you were the only person in that building who wasn't trying to get something from me, and I—" She paused. "I was so tired. I've been tired for so long. And you were just sitting there looking at a photo of your daughter. And it was the most—" She stopped. "The most what?" "The most human thing I'd seen in months," she said. "And I wanted to be near it." Cole looked at the dark yard. At the strip of sky visible above the fence line, the stars doing their old, reliable work. "Rosie asked me something a few weeks ago," he said. "What?" "She asked if I loved you." He felt Diane go still beside him. "I told her I was getting there." "What would you say now?" Diane asked, quietly, without performance. He looked at her. She was looking at him, the amber light gone now, replaced by something softer, the ordinary nightlight, which was enough. "I'd say I'm there," he said. She held the moon snail in her open hand and looked at him and said, "Me too." It wasn't elaborate. It wasn't the kind of declaration you'd put in a press release or on a magazine cover. It was the kind that happens at the back step of a small house after the dishes are done and the kid is asleep and the day has already done its work, quiet and sure and as solid as anything either of them had ever built. In the weeks that followed, the news cycle moved on. News cycles always do. Another story arrived to replace theirs, and then another, and the headline about the CEO and the Navy man faded into the archive where most headlines go. BCC's stock recovered. The Singapore office opened on schedule. Margaret Chu sent Diane a brief, characteristically precise email that said, "Only good quarter. Better decisions. Keep going." Diane kept the baby moon snail on her desk at the office. Not hidden right there on the corner of the desk, next to her laptop, and her coffee and the legal pad she took notes on. More than one person asked about it. She told them it was a gift from someone who knew where things came from. Cole got orders for a new assignment. A 9-month posting not overseas but not close, either the kind of posting that in the past would have meant rearranging everything. He and Diane sat at the kitchen table after Rosie was in bed and worked through it together the way people work through hard things when they're not doing it alone, practically honestly, without pretending it wasn't difficult and without pretending it was impossible. Rosie, when told, had been quiet for a moment and then said, "Gerald and I will be here when you get back, Daddy." And then after a pause, Diane too. A statement, not a question. Cole had looked at Diane across the table, Diane had looked at Rosie. Diane too, she'd confirmed. On the last Sunday before he left, they went to the beach. All three of them, plus Gerald in his pocket. The water was cold, and the sky was the particular gray of late fall, the kind of gray that has its own beauty if you're willing to look at it straight. Rosie found a sand dollar, her first intact one since September, not a single crack along the edge, and held it up with both hands, the way she'd held the moon snail, like something pulled from the center of the world. "This one's for Daddy," she said. "So he has something from this beach while he's gone." Cole crouched down and took it, held it carefully. It was lighter than it looked, the way the most valuable things often are. He looked at Rosie, at Diane, at the water behind them, and the gray sky above them, and the sand dollar in his hands. He thought about what he'd told Diane on the garden terrace months ago, the night the whole thing started, about noticing someone versus looking at them, about the difference between seeing and want. He thought about the 12 years Diane had spent building towards something she couldn't quite name. He thought about the note on the kitchen counter, and the 4-year-old asking, "When is Mama coming back?" and the YouTube hair tutorials at 11 p.m., and Gerald, and the shell map, and the board meeting, and the chocolate lava cake, and all of it. The whole unglamorous, beautiful accumulated weight of how 2 people and 1 7-year-old had found their way to this beach on this gray Sunday morning. The greatest things, Cole thought, are never the ones you set out to build. They're the ones you find yourself standing inside of one day and realize, with the particular quiet certainty of something that has always been true, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. He put the sand dollar carefully in his jacket pocket next to the photograph of Rosie he'd carried since she was 4 years old. Then he stood up and took his daughter's hand on one side and Diane's on the other. And the three of them stood at the edge of the water and watched the ocean do what the ocean always does: arrive and pull back and arrive again, patient and enormous and completely indifferent to everything except the simple fact of its own presence, which, when you think about it, is all any of us are ever trying to learn how to do.